paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, start your engines!
Come on, Mama!
Fasten your seatbelts and get ready for fun.
The Gumball Rally has begun!
The Gumball Rally. An all-out, anything goes, absolutely illegal race. From Times Square to the Pacific Ocean.
No catalytic converter and no 55-mile-an-hour speed limit.
The next time out, I'm going to make sure you get a driver's license.
35 magic hours, flat out against the red line.
It's not a risk, it's a challenge.
The drivers come in all shapes, sizes, and sexes.
Hey, slow that thing down!
If you catch me, you can have me.
From all walks of life, all over the world.
The first rule of Italian driving. What's behind me is not important.
But in the Gumball Rally, the cars are the stars. Camaro, Corvette, Cobra, Porsche, Ferrari, Rolls-Royce, Kawasaki. They go over, under, around, and through. Anything that stands between them and the finish line. It's a mad, 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 mad world on wheels.
He is magnificent.
Come on, this is a race, man!
Some things are more important than winning.
So fasten your seatbelts.
What's the matter with you?
The Gumball Rally has begun.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me again is Mr. Chris Stachiw.
Hey, you make a good Italian.
Also along for the ride is Father Malone.
No more jokes!
We are returning to the world of vehicular mayhem with a double bill request from Patreon donor Andrew Hendrickson, the Gumball Rally, and the Cannonball Run. Plus, we may talk about Cannonball too, just for fun, and to make things a little bit confusing as well. Let's start with the Gumball Rally. Released in 1976, the film was written by Leon Capetanos and Charles Bale, who also directed. It stars Michael Sarrazin as Michael Bannon, a corporate exec who gets his kicks from an all-out coast-to-coast race where he's partnered with his buddy, Professor Sam Graves, who's played by Nicholas Pryor. And he really is just kind of racing against his rival Smitty and Smitty's ringer Franco, played by a very young Raul Julia. We are going to be spoiling things for all of the aforementioned films as we go along, probably a few other films as well. So if you don't want anything ruined ever in your entire life, just go ahead and turn off the podcast, watch every movie that has ever been released, and come on back after you have, because we will still be here in about 100 years. So Chris, when was the first time you saw this? Was this a first time watch for you?
I was actually going to wait 100 years and then answer your question. The only movie of these that I had seen is the most recent one that I rewatched that wasn't part of the initial offering. So I had not seen, I guess, these original inspirations for that movie. I had never seen Cannonball Rally, Cannonball Run, Gumball Rally, or Cannonball. I had seen none of them. So this is a first time viewing across the board for all three.
And Father Malone, how about yourself? Gumball Rally, new to it? I don't think so.
It's one of the rare movies from my youth, and I can't
tell you exactly where or when I was when I saw it. I do know it was late at night, and it was probably on TV 38 in Boston. I think I had already seen Cannonball Run on cable ad nauseum, so it had to have been around like 84 or 85, and was instantly mesmerized and instantly taken with what a superior movie it was to Cannonball Run. So that was my first experience, and I love this movie, and I rewatch it every couple of years.
I have to say, this one's kind of unfamiliar to me because I also grew up watching Cannonball Run and Cannonball Run 2. Love me some Death Race 2000, but Gumball Rally, I really hadn't even heard of it until I was doing research for an article about coast-to-coast race movies and just kind of a vehicular mayhem as well, talking a little bit about, Vanishing Point, Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry.
All I know is you just want your Larry.
So I am not that familiar with this movie. I watched it for the second time in preparation for this. They really play up that gumball thing. Oh my goodness, with those opening credits. This, man, what a cast. What a star-studded cast. And that's the same thing we're going to be saying about a lot of these movies, I think, as we go along. Though Michael Sarrazin, not necessarily as well known as a lot of other people. We talked a lot about him when we discussed They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Unfortunately, not a very long career, but I thought he had a lot of good stuff going on. I really like him in this role.
You mentioned the cast being really good in this movie. I think that almost becomes a metatextual gag with these movies, is that it almost ends up being, at least with Cannonball Run, in my opinion, it's almost completely about the cast and nothing else. Seeing them in these wacky situations. And the movie, the more recent movie that I watched, Rat Race, which is pretty much just Cannonball Run, that movie, again, lives and breathes off of the cast, just like Gumball, just like Cannonball, just like Cannonball Run. It's like, who are these actors that you love and know, and what are they doing that's more or less, for a lot of them, against type?
With Gumball Rally and Cannonball, which sort of came on its heels, these car pictures are kind of tailor-made to have a big cast, so you can people it with, lots and lots of interesting actors, not just sort of movie stars, but, character actors and, New York stage actors and such. With both of these movies, that's an asset, and what you were saying, Chris, is true. It's like this kind of trickle-down effect where by the time it gets to Cannonball Run, it's just about the personalities of those people. Whereas, like, with Gumball Rally, like, even the well-known people just look like regular people. So it adds something to the overall effect of the movie.
Well, and some of them are known now. I mean, at the time, it's Gary Busey and Raul Julia, who, I mean, they're known, obviously.
In 75, who knows who Gary Busey is,
Right. But now it's like, oh, it's Gary Busey or, Raul Julia. But with Cannonball Run, it's like immediately Burt Reynolds, immediately Jackie Chan, Farrah Fawcett. It's like, you know who these people are. And especially at the time, you know who these people are. To your point, Mike, with Gumball Rally, I don't want to jump ahead, but this is the best cast of the things that we watched, I think, without even a question. Especially Michael Sarrazin, who's just so charismatic as a lead, really.
It's interesting how this one really does set the pattern, and we're definitely going to talk about some of the other movies as we go along and how they follow this film. Some of these jokes, some of these gags, this whole thing of the guy who wants to be part of the race, who is that in this one? Jose, who wants to be part of the race, and so he does one of these, I'll transport your car from New York to California, allegedly paying this guy, or he's just taking this ride type of thing. That's going to come up. Yes, the driveway. That is going to come up in almost every movie that we're going to talk about here. So
there's also the Mad character who happens to be of a different ethnicity. In this one, he's Hungarian. In Cannonball, he's German, and in Cannonball Run,
is it Jamie Farr? Is he the crazy one?
He is. He's sort of wacky, right? He's all comic relief all the time.
Sort of wacky, sort of, just kind of, just a little bit.
He's not pulling it off. That doesn't mean he's not going for wacky.
Oh, I know he is going for wacky. He's not pulling it off. That's my problem. I
don't think any of these guys are pulling off wacky, honestly.
I think the Mad Hungarian pulls it off pretty good, especially because even know if he ever talks. That he
doesn't.
He's got these like Joe Spinell eyes going and just the little mustache. I love it.
They shoot it where you can see his eyes only for the most part because it's through the visor. It's so effective. It's so effective that they copy it 2 more times. What's funny about this movie, like you said, Mike, is the formula is so set in stone that they barely deviate from it.
I love that Raul Julia is playing an Italian, and such a lech. This whole thing of his kryptonite is that any woman that's around, he immediately falls for, and that ends up, spoilers, ends up fucking him over when it comes to the end of the race. It was pretty great. I also love that Colleen Camp is there at one point when he ends up telling his other driver, Smitty, the rival character, you go ahead, you drive on. I need to have a few hours or an hour with Colleen Camp, like you do.
There are some things more important than winning. And in this case, he's absolutely right. Colleen Camp is one of these actresses. I keep seeing her in movies from earlier and earlier time periods, and she doesn't age, and I don't understand it. Raul Julia as well. At least he's 35 here, which I found out, but he still looks impossibly young. But what a great character. And Raul Julia manages to pull off what you just brought up, Mike, this sort of silly convention, the kryptonite, like he sees a pretty girl and everything has to stop. And I believe it with this guy. Like, a wacky trait that he makes real.
And he's got this thing, too, where he carries around a squirt gun, but you don't know it's a squirt gun. So he comes in and he pulls this gun on Sarrazin. He's just like, how dare you humiliate me? And he gives this huge speech. And I'm just like, this is why we love Raul Julia. He is really knocking it out of the park with this silly movie, but he is just giving it his all. And when he pulls the trigger on the gun, I don't know what's really going to happen. And when it ends up being water, I'm like, okay, I really didn't see that happening the first time I saw this.
That's like his Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka moment, right? With the cane. Like, now we don't know what this character is capable of for the rest of the movie. And what I love is it's clearly a real gun that Props has like rigged up so water will squirt through it, because when he's pointing it directly into the camera, there's no mistaking it. And about that scene, this is one of the movies that I, introduced to as many people as possible. And years ago, I had a friend and I who, for a full decade, would say back and forth, like, you make the jokes, like, at each other. So he's so fucking funny in this movie.
What's funny is that character could have been, and is in these other movies, at least one of them, could have been beyond obnoxious and grating and unfunny. And he's not, because Raul Julia doesn't play it all the way. He doesn't go all the way like Jamie Farr does in Cannonball. He kind of reins it back a little bit. It's not like madcap. It's kind of verges on slapstick, but it's not madcap. And that's what I would use that word to describe Cannonball Run. This is kind of over the top, Gumball Rally is, but it's still rather reined in.
It's a weird hierarchy where Cannonball Run is completely wacky and Cannonball is a little too serious for its own good, and this one sits nicely in between. It just keeps elevating itself.
And that, I think, is why Raul Julia works, because we do get into, with this formula, other characters doing that exact same thing, and it really doesn't work. And I think it speaks to Raul Julia as an actor and to the quality of the story writing, because the screenplay and the story in this film is there are some interesting twists, some interesting turns. And then it kind of takes a little bit of an interesting diversion at the end with who ends up winning. I liked this movie a lot. Comparatively, I really enjoyed it.
This one, too, is the only one that I can think of where you have... So you've got the rivalry between Sarrazin's character and then the Smitty character, which is interesting in and of itself, that there are all these other racers, but really it's pretty much, it boils down to a 2-team race. That it's also not a man and a woman in each of the cars, that they're usually pretty 2 men, 2 women. You do have the man and woman that are doing the rideshare type of thing across the country, but for the most part, it's really the friendship between Pryor and Sarrazin, the weird cooperation between Raul Julia and the Smitty character. you've got the whole thing of Roscoe, the cop. I don't think you have a cop in any of these other movies, and Roscoe's desperate attempt to spoil this whole race, and that he keeps flying from city to city to city and trying to come up with different ways to undermine this race. And it's him undermining the race. It's not the rival undermining the race. There is a little bit of that, but it's not like, oh, I'm going to fuck up Michael Sarrazin's car or whatever. It's Roscoe who is trying to do this stuff.
There's some of that in Cannonball, though, which is interesting. What's funny is in Cannonball, you have cops and then parole officers, but the cops don't insert themselves. And ultimately in Gumball, the cops don't really do anything because it's played for a gag at the end of the movie, a gag that I think really works, and a funny and fun way to end the film. But I'm kind of glad that it didn't have outside forces. It kind of kept the idea pure and all about the race. And we'll see when we talk about some of the other things. Like once they start deviating off of that initial path, they start getting lost in kind of weird diversions that don't really go anywhere and don't really add anything to the movies either.
Yeah, early on, some of the early scenes you're talking about between Michael Sarrazin and Smitty's character, that's Tim McIntire, by the way, playing Smitty, who is so fantastic as Alan Freed in American Hot Wax. There's sort of a casual, genial friendship, a camaraderie that goes on amongst all of these characters in Gumball Rally, really, that isn't necessarily missing in Cannonball Run, because those characters are all obviously having a good time as well, but as grounded in the real world as they are, and as sort of far-flung fantastic as they are, they seem like genuine people having genuine relationships. There's a scene right after the sort of big introductory scene between Smitty and Michael Sarrazin's character, just walking and talking on the streets of New York, and it feels comfortable and lived in, and I really like that. That is definitely missing from Cannonball, and it's kind of falsely phoned in Cannonball Run.
It took me a while to even realize that they were rivals at first, because when Sarrazin he's in the boardroom when we first meet him, and he has this little safe, and he opens up the safe and there's gumballs inside, and he's just like, okay, it's basically his moment of like, I need to have another one of these rallies. It's kind of like his only way of really expressing himself, I think. So he ends up going and picking up the phone, and he calls Smitty, and he just says Gumball, and that's it. Hangs up. That's it. The whole thing starts, and that it becomes this whole thing of people getting the Gumball call and going out and doing this. And so when they meet up, I'm just like, oh yeah, they're old friends. And, that's the guy that is helping him set up this whole thing. And it took me a little while before it's like, oh no, they don't like each other. And there's really this like, we've known each other forever and we just don't like each other. There's like this rivalry that goes back to when we were children. I'm like, oh, okay, that's a very interesting way of approaching this. So it's not the friendly rivalry. It's basically like, I genuinely don't like this guy, but we end up together all the time.
And I really like that narrative convention of using the word gumball to get everybody's attention, because there's nothing like that in any of the other films. And I like that there's this idea that, the three of us could be here podcasting, and so I get the text and it says Gumball, and it's like, drop everything. It's time. And I like that as an idea because it makes it more intimate for these characters. Like, you're not just showing up and entering yourself into this. Like, it's like a group of people who are always doing this together. And you get that sense that this is a group of people who are, yeah, like you said, even though some of them are at odds with each other, ultimately they're all sharing a beer in LA at the end of the movie. There's camaraderie between people in the cars in the other movies, but there's no camaraderie among the characters together outside of this movie. And I appreciate that.
The early sequence of everyone getting the call to assemble for the race, like that whole thing is wonderful. And then they carry that through. We're seeing all these people gather, but we haven't been tipped off at all what the plot of this movie is. That isn't until they get to what is like a cultish chamber within this like hidden like alleyway restaurant. And that's when it gets laid out. And I like that not only do we get a putting it together sequence there, before we get a reveal of what this actually is. But we get a scene afterwards of them like all sort of working on their cars together, and it's all of the same sort of piece. Whereas in the other movies that follow, like you said, it's like everyone just sort of knows that they're going to the race and we're just going along with them. There's no mystery or intrigue or anything. And then when they get there, they're just a bunch of different people racing against each other. Who cares?
In and of itself, that is fun. I mean, wacky races. That cartoon. This is that live action in a lot of ways. But I do like the idea that these characters have a vested interest in them finishing the race together. That's the thing. In this movie, I believe that they all want to finish the race together, regardless of what place they're in, they want to finish. In Cannonball Run, I genuinely don't think they all have different interests. And then in Cannonball, I mean, it's kind of its own thing altogether. But how does Cannonball Run feel derivative of this movie? How is that possible? I mean, I know it came later, but it feels so derivative.
Well, they all come from the same source, don't they?
This is very much inspired by the real thing, the Cannonball Rally that they have. And this, in turn, inspired the other films and inspired an actual Gumball Rally. This really has its roots in things like, Chris, you mentioned Wacky Races, the cartoon, which also has its roots in The Great Race, the Blake Edwards film from, I think, 65, which also, then if you go back to, like, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, that's very similar to this, and I'm sure that there are predecessors to that as well. So what's the original one? I don't know, but there's this weird through line of all of these films where you can be like, oh, well, that's like the Tony Curtis character, and he's like the Jonathan Winters character from this one. So it's really bizarre how far back this stuff goes, all the way up to, like you said, Rat Race, and there might be ones after that. I mean, Death Race somehow turned into a franchise after 30 years or whatever. It suddenly comes roaring back, pun intended, and now there's all these sequels in which I have seen every single one of these Death Race movies, which
I am so
God
sorry.
Have mercy on my soul. Some of them are really good and some are just terrible.
I feel like Death Race leans a little bit harder into like pro wrestling, if that makes sense. They really like take the characters and amp them up to the point where they're like, it's a character being played by a person.
It is bred in circuses, gladiatorial type games.
Which is super fun.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Are we talking about Death Race or Death Race 2000?
Death Race.
I'm talking about Death Race 2000.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Because you're talking about it like in glowing terms, and I can't believe we were talking about Death Race. Okay. Never mind.
1975, a year before Gumball Rally comes out. So you could say that this might even be playing on that a little bit as well. But, the whole thing of the pairing and, different themes and stuff. But with this one, I can see where the whole thing with the Stephen Keats character and his partner.
Right. Stephen Keats. Ivory Apes own Stephen Keats.
I believe that you mean The Last Dinosaurs own Stephen Keats, but...
No, you mean Turk 182 Stephen Keats.
See, this is the thing. In this movie, Stephen Keats being weird...
I think we're starting the Keats cast and we don't even know it.
Yeah, the Keats cast. All of like 30 things he was in.
I love Stephen Keats. Friends of Eddie Coyle, his performance in that is like beyond, like he should have been a huge goddamn star, Stephen Keats. One of my favorite lines of all time, life is hard, man, but it's harder if you're stupid. Like that is ingrained in my head. So Stephen Keats comes with me.
I have seen him this year more than any other actor because I also saw him in fucking Death Wish where he plays Bronson's son-in-law. I mean, Jesus Christ. I was like, oh, there he is again. Fourth time this year. No shit. Not even joking. Yeah, there's only like 20 more movies and then that's everything, unfortunately. So unfortunate is the key phrase with Stephen Keats.
But this whole thing of Keats and his partner pretending to be cops in order to beat the system, which we're going to get with the whole ambulance thing in Cannonball Run.
Do we have to?
We eventually will get there in the second half of the show, but I love that they have this gimmick going on and that they are able to turn it into like the whole thing with the cop that tries to arrest them, and they're like, oh, we're shooting a movie. Oh, the camera's over there. And Keats, yeah, he's just eating up the scenery. I love it. Love it. And I'm trying to remember the name of the guy that plays the cop that pulls them over. He is just amazing. I love his voice. Med Flory. What a great appearance by this guy. And that's the thing is, I really like all of these performances. I won't say that this movie for me is free from flaws. Like, I have to say some of the patterns that it falls into get a little rote after a while. There's the whole like, okay, we're going to go for a while. We're going to cut back to the two guys who never made it out of the garage. We're going to cut to Roscoe trying to upset the race or arrest the people. Then we're going to have a whole bunch of crashes, and then we're going to go back to the race and kind of carry on from there. And after a while, the editing feels very by the numbers as far as, okay, we're going to have this car, this car, this car.
And there's the Hungarian scene again.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, like it's really the stuff with the Mad Hungarian where you notice the pattern of the editing. I don't know. You need a deft hand with this kind of stuff because it can get really monotonous after a while.
I can forgive the editing, but I cannot forgive the music in this movie. It's like music from a Kurt Russell Disney movie. It's just like, la, 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 la. Like, when you watch the opening, people have to be expecting, like, you know, Jonathan Winters or, like, you know, like some sort of kiddie fair. And, you know, there's a scene where two girls, like, end up having sex with these guys so they'll fix their car. This is not for children.
No, that's really unpleasant when the two rednecks are there. And the one says something like, don't do anything weird, Joe. Last time they locked us up. And I'm like, what?
Like, this weird scenario got even stranger. Like, this was potentially... Was this movie G-rated? It must have been 75, right? Like,
I don't know. They might have gone for a PG. I don't remember any explicit swearing, but...
Right. You would think the tone of it would automatically give it that, but I don't know.
That was a little unpleasant. That's Joanne Nail is one of the drivers in there. The lovely Joanne Nail, who I mostly know from Switchblade Sisters. She is fucking awesome in that. And she's terrific in everything that I've seen her in so far, which isn't nearly enough. Again, to your point from earlier with Stephen Keats, 22 roles that she did. She's this wonderful actress in 22 things that she's been in over the years.
Always such a drag going back and watching an older movie and finding a performance that is just sparkling. And then immediately checking the IMDb page and seeing they're, you know, only a few years afterwards, they just stopped acting. Like, this movie is rife with them. But then again, it has some like Gary Busey, who, by the way, that's gotta be him, right? Like, he's not acting. That's gotta be Gary Busey in this movie, right?
That's Gary Busey, long ago Gary Busey, yes.
He brought his own whistle to set that day.
He's fucking unhinged in this movie, and I loved it. There is not really another character in any of these other movies that is an analog to that car in this movie. And I kind of wish there had been, because they're essentially like the dipshit Dukes of Hazzard. In the Gumball Rally, like, they never try to reapproach that in any of the other movies, which I found strange, because that feels, especially at the time, that feels like a pretty prescient thing to put into your movie. Is like they do it in Cannonball with something else, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. But I liked that Gary Busey performance because, yeah, that is just Gary Busey. That's just him. That's just him with that hat and everything.
Just screaming and singing and never shutting up. You know,
yeah. Drinking while driving.
This is still Gary Busey. Like, you could probably just go, oh, he's just sort of, it's just Gary. He's just sort of lively. Like, he hasn't come completely unhinged at this point, but, like, you know, it's still a bit much.
His unhingedness is being attributed to age.
I mean, he's somewhere around Buddy Holly's story around this point, so he's still turning in some really solid performances. I mean, not that he doesn't still. I mean, all the way up to, like, Lost Highway, he's still just rock solid with stuff. But man, oh man, yeah, you're right. He is off the deep end. I was really glad to see, what's the gentleman's name? J. Pat O'Malley, who, Chris, we've run into him a few times, veteran of both Kolchak and the Bernie Miller Show. So, and he's going to show up again for us 2 more times on Bernie Miller. Plays this very, you know, erudite British man. I mostly know him, though, from his voice work. He is just all over the Disney cartoons from the late 60s, well, all the way back to the early 60s. He did voices in 101 Dalmatians, Alice in Wonderland, Jungle Book. I mean, he was all over Disney stuff, and so he's super familiar, both his voice and his face.
Also, the other amazing character pairing in this movie is the two old British men who, again, that's why I like this movie the most out of all the movies we watched of these ilk, is because the pairings in this movie are so good nobody else tried to do them. Like the two old British dudes, like Gary Busey. It's like those are so good that if you tried to copy them, it would just be you ripping it off and not doing it nearly as well. And J. Pat O'Malley, and you're like, oh, hello. It's like, what? Whoever thought this up? Like, awesome, fantastic. It totally works. In the context of this movie, it's just the right amount of caricature to work without being, like I said, super madcap like we get with Jamie Farr in Cannonball Run.
The only thing that bothers me about those two gentlemen, because I love the characters and I love going to them, is the fact that they seem to be the only two actors always being towed by a rig. They never seem to be driving, whereas everyone else in the movie is obviously driving, sometimes terrifyingly so.
The scene with Angie being threatened by the bikers, Jose's girlfriend, that's a little much for me at times, but I'm just like, all right, whatever. It's okay. I understand this is a 1970s exploitation picture. You're going to have this, but man, oh man.
All three of these movies are a bit too rapey. And in this case, they're attacking my third favorite captain of the Starship Enterprise. You remember her from Next Generation, right?
This is Captain Garrett of the Starship Enterprise. To any Federation ship, we have been attacked by Romulan warships and require immediate assistance.
Oh my god, she's great. So beautiful. Another one where it's like, how is she not on dinner plates, like, with that face? Like, what? That scene is gross. It goes on way too long. I don't know that we get the same thing in Cannonball, but, like, definitely in Cannonball Run, there's an even more egregious moment to come.
Well, and that is the thing about this, again, these kind of trio of movies, is when they copy each other, they seemingly are just copying everything. And they're not being judicious with their copying, because some things do not need to come over at all. The treatment of the female characters is not great in any of them, frankly.
At least in Cannonball, you got to figure with Mary Warrenov in the car, they're in real no danger at all.
I mean, in Cannonball Run, it's Adrienne Barbeau, so...
Right, and she's a formidable force, but, like, look, man, the bikers carry them into a shed. What's gonna happen there, you know?
In every one of these movies, there is a all-female car, which I don't have any issue with, obviously. Aside from the way that they're treated by the movie, by the story, the narrative does not suit. They're not suited to the narrative at all. They're there for crude, shitty jokes that maybe landed when the movie came out. But, I mean, we're past this kind of shitty humor. This movie, if it were written now, wouldn't pander to that.
In Gumball Rally, like, we've already talked about the scene where the two girls basically trade sex for car repair, but when they're talking afterwards, the one girl, says, like, it's so wistful, like, well, sometimes you can't choose where it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Like, just a fact of life. That somehow elevates Gumball Rally in my mind. Like, they're at least aware of the tropes they're playing in.
It feels like it takes a long time for them to get out of New York City, though I was pretty happy seeing some of the shots of New York, especially must be early morning when there's no cars on the street, and just seeing those empty streets. And then also seeing the Hotel Continental from the John Wick movies in this movie, the Hotel Del Monaco it's called here. I was like, oh, hey, I know that. It was funny because they were showing John Wick all fucking weekend on one of the, I think it was fucking Sci-Fi Channel. Go figure that. And I just kept seeing the Hotel Continental, and I was like, oh, I just saw that in Gumball Rally. That's pretty cool.
I'm just a real sucker for empty streets in movies, and nobody did it better than the 1970s, where I think you could still get away with it if you did it Sunday morning when people were actually still asleep. The West Coast version of that is, for me, Omega Man. something about an empty New York and 1970s in particular, empty New York and empty LA is just something magnificent. And they do it so well here. Like, even with the few scattered people on the street that they have, it is so empty and canyon-like. It's beautiful.
You guys are talking about, New York and the beginning of this movie. I appreciate that, because that's the other thing about these movies that we really haven't talked about yet is the in-between moments when they're on the road. Some of these movies don't do a very good job of making it feel like they're not just shooting in the same spot over and over again, which Cannonball Run feels like there's like 120-mile stretch of highway where they filmed the entire movie. And it's like, this is a movie about going fucking continental. The whole thing is from one coast to the other. If you have driven any amount of time in this country, which I know the three of us all have, one of us more than the other by a fucking mountain, you will know that this country has varied terrain. And some of these movies, this one does a pretty good job. Cannonball Run does not. Cannonball does. But giving us a varied amount of terrain and climbs for them to be driving through, because again, in Cannonball Run, not in this movie, but in that movie, it feels like the same 20-mile stretch of highway, which it doesn't suit what they're talking about. At least the driving in this movie is interesting. And it seems like the people, like we've mentioned, who are doing the driving are making it look exciting.
That's the one thing I really liked about Death Race 2000. I'm a sucker for maps. So the whole thing of showing, all right, we started here and now Frankenstein's car is over here and Machine Gun Joe Viterbo's over here and, Brunhilde or whatever's over here. And just having those maps and how they come back together and they'll have those stops where they, converse and they have their dinner and all that stuff. And then they split back up again and go out. And just, of course, with that, they're all out to kill each other, which I really freaking love. But showing the map and having that be your touch points as far as where these people are. And I just kept thinking like, man, I wish there was a map in some of these movies. I would love it if I know, like you can garner some things like, oh, they must be in Illinois now, or they must be in, St. Louis or whatever. But there's a lot of times where I'm just like, where the hell are these people? I don't
Arizona,
yeah.
Arizona or New Mexico, essentially exclusively. It's the same stretch of desert highway, baby.
Well, that's the thing that I liked about this one is like you do feel like you're in New York City, and I think you are in New York City, and then you feel like you're on these roads and stuff. It feels very much more like the Rain People or Two Lane Blacktop or something where they're actually going places rather than, all right, we're going to go to Los Angeles and we're going to film 20 miles outside of town. And to your point, make it look like it's different places and just shoot that same stretch of highway over and over and over again.
I can feel the progression in this movie. And the most successful of these movies in those driving parts, you actually can feel there is a sense of progression with what's happening. That's when these movies are the most successful.
Yeah, I think Cannonball is a little less successful than Gumball Rally, and Cannonball Run is obviously the worst. It just seems like they're in, a 20-mile stretch of Georgia or something. Whereas this, we're definitely in New York. At the end, we're definitely at the Queen Mary in Long Beach. And I agree, we could have used a map, Mike. Like, they're so effective. And what's funny to me is when the movie starts, we get a shot of the Empire State Building and a credit and a subtitle that tells us we're in New York, New York. Like, okay, we get that, but like, how about 10 minutes from now, let us know where we are? Like, we spend a lot of time in New York, and then the next time I notice where we actually are, other than they mentioned Jersey, is Oklahoma, because that's where the police car basically nearly crashes, and we can see the decal on the side. If you're going to put a subtitle at the beginning letting us know where we are, you could continue that through. We, as an audience, we're not going to complain.
But the problem is, and the reason they didn't do that is because once you start saying where it's set, you have to make it look like it. And if you don't do that, it just is anywhere. It's a stretch of highway between LA and New York. And that's why they didn't do it. It's a fucking cheat. It is a cheat 100%. And I get it. It's easier that way because then you can just spend your entire budget of the movie on alcohol for Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise.
Yeah, but no matter what your location was in the 1970s in a TV show, it was shot in Los Angeles. And they just said, this is now...
I'm not disagreeing with
This is Prague. And we went, okay.
But the problem is in this, it's like the expectation is they're moving. That's the whole thing. And they're not doing a very good job of showing that in actuality.
is there actually anything between New York and LA? It's just a bunch of hicks, right?
Right.
They're going to get off their tractors to come see this movie?
Fuck all those people in the flyover states.
Yeah, the flyover state's really going to see a Michael Sarrazin movie. Pish posh. The problem with this movie is it set the bar way too high for everything else that I watched. I should have watched this last, I guess.
There's a joy to that.
I really like when Smitty and Bannon, the Michael Sarrazin character, come together at one point when there's the quote-unquote rabbit who is playing them against the cops and playing the cops against them and collecting money from everybody. And when they realize that something has gone wrong and they're just like, okay, let's take care of this guy. I like when they pair up for a while and that rivalry just melts away because they have a common enemy in Rabbit, and that guy's just a piece of shit. I really like that.
Yeah. I mean, that interplay, again, you don't get that in any of these other movies. You don't really get the interplay between the cars actually being positive. It's all very adversarial and negative. And downright murderous in one of them.
It's very gentle, the beatdown that they give to this guy, too, which I actually appreciated. If this was Cannonball, oh my God, they would have cut his head off.
Or at least shot him right through the forehead.
Yeah, it would have been bad. So when Michael Sarrazin tosses the guy's steering wheel into the dirt, like, you can have this in a moment, I was like, oh, now you're being too nice. Take the steering wheel. This guy was trying to fuck all of you.
Come on, he is Canadian.
Yeah, and that does lead to one of the best parts in the movie, which is when Roscoe, the sheriff, looks up at the sky, is just like,
Why me?
You're an asshole, Roscoe. That's why.
I like that they cut to some random cop walking past. Like, they put it in voiceover, but like, it was him. It was this guy who said it.
It was not the actual our Lord and Savior speaking down to Roscoe. I was also glad to hear the little Casey Kasem cameo in here as well. That was nice. He's
always a fan.
Doing the traffic.
He's acting, too. That ain't Casey Kasem's regular pattern. He's like really going for it, like a drive time kind of guy.
Those boys duked it out with that pesky poltergeist.
I love it. I love it.
By Casey Kasem.
The very unexpected ending of, Chris, you mentioned, like, who wins is not the person that you expect to win. And then when Sarrazin's just like, at the very end, he's just like, Gumball. And they do it again. And now they're going to race back to New York. I fucking love that little twist at the end. That's so nice.
What a hopeful, happy ending, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And it, like I said, it really makes me feel like they're in this for the race. It's about the race, not about who wins. Like, they're just there for the race to have a good time. As long as everybody finishes, awesome. That's what's more important. And I like that. It's a lot less adversarial, which, I mean, again, I understand like an adversarial version of this movie could be good. It's not Cannonball Run, let's put it that way.
It either has to be this or Death Race 2000. Can't have it either way. Like, murderous intent toward each other that's kind of, hinted at, and they do a little kind of dirty tricks to each other. Doesn't fly. Either be nice and have a good race, or fucking try and murder each other from the get-go.
No one's hiring assassins in this movie.
Yeah, which is a failing, I think.
So let's go ahead. We're going to take a break, and we're going to play an interview with Professor Sam Graves himself, Nicholas Pryor, and we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
My name is T2756. Would you like to have sex with me now for money?
Worst Movies Ever Played is back with 3 new VHS movies for your ears.
Sextapede, you're alive again. How I've missed you.
Anything can happen in this actual play RPG podcast, and we mean anything.
You didn't think you could go to Texas Instruments without murdering someone, did you?
Subscribe to Worst Movies Ever Played wherever you get your podcasts.
I am so happy to speak with you again. We talked a few years ago about Smile, and we are covering the film The Gumball Rally, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that and your experience on working on the film.
The whole thing started with an article in the Los Angeles Times about the Cannonball Baker C to Signing C Memorial Trophy Dash. And Chuck Bale read the article, and he thought this would make a great movie. So he bundled it up, and he sent it off to a man named Guy McElwain, who was an executive at Warner's, as well as an agent or CAA. I don't know which was which. I don't know which hat he was wearing at the time. But he sent a note along saying, insert tongue in cheek and read. And I thought it would be a good movie too. So that started everything going. And the audition process was quite remarkable because it's such a large cast and so many different parts. I remember Chuck was given an office in Warner Brothers Producers Row. They had a whole bunch of little buildings all stitched together, and there were lines of people showing up to go into Chuck's office and come out and go in and come out. Well, we all auditioned for Chuck. Then we had an opportunity to read the script, which was, I think, the funniest script that I can remember ever being given. I literally laughed until my sides ached. It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And then I got very excited. I told everybody I was talking about how much I wanted to do it. Oh, yeah, I forgot my mustache. I had a mustache at the time. Whenever I was out of work for long enough, I had a kind of a superstition that I should immediately start trying to grow a beard or mustache or something to create some facial hair, and maybe that's what they'd be looking for. As it turned out, they thought it was a great idea. So they assembled the cast, and that's when it began to get very complicated and kind of funny. They said all of the different people and all of the different backgrounds, and Chuck in charge. Chuck was a stuntman who had gotten successful as a stuntman and become a supervisor, and then he graduated to second unit on some comedy movies. And he was very good at complicated traffic situations. And he was not at all afraid to either be intentionally a little loose about his permits, but he would happily screw up all of San Francisco, which he did a couple of times, I was told. So he wanted to do a feature. He wanted to do a movie. And this was before anybody outside the business knew he was. He did the Stuntman, the movie Stuntman after that, with his monogrammed saddlebags, and he got a little better known after that. But nobody in the business kind of knew who he was. And all of a sudden, he's got this cast of all of these different actors and all of these different situations. So the first thing that happened was they told us, we who were in the race, that what they needed to do was to train us so that we would be comfortable being towed at 100 miles an hour. Camera crew, Gil, what's his name, and his camera crew, he had told Warner Brothers that he could tow any of the cars involved. I don't think he knew at the time that one of them was going to be a Rolls at 100 miles an hour. So they said, terrific. So they hired a couple of not Formula One drivers, but lesser drivers. There was a Formula 500 at that time, and I think a Formula 200. A fellow named John Morton, who was very much in the mold of Martin Short, kind of a short guy, dry sense of humor. And another driver named Wes Dawn, who was Bob Dawn's brother, the Makeup Dawns. And they had a small fleet of Datsun 250, 270, whatever the number was, not 300s, to take us to a track near Los Angeles and just get us used to being driven at 100 miles an hour. Have you ever been driven at 100 miles an hour?
I don't think I've ever even got past maybe 80.
And you were driving, right?
I was driving. I wasn't being pulled.
Whole different experience. To be driven, you get in this little car, and Wes, or in my case, Sean Morton, says, okay, all set. And yes, and what he does is he floors it. He floors it, and you get thrown back against the seat. And what flashed through my mind was my father's admonition when he was teaching me to drive. And he told me when he was teaching me to drive that when you're on the road and you see a sign that says turn coming up and says 40 miles an hour, he says, the road has been engineered to take 40 miles an hour. If you go faster, you're going to fly off the road. Wrong. They don't build a road like that. They make the sign like that. After the initial shock of taking turns at speed, it was pretty exhilarating. And then he asked me if we will want to switch seats and could I drive? And sure. And I kind of liked it. I wasn't going as fast as he was, but I kind of liked it, and I liked him, and we had a wonderful time. So we would keep going down to this track. It was part of a Marine base south of Los Angeles. We got pretty good and we got pretty comfortable. Now, that included me and Tim McIntire, who didn't really need it because he owned a Porsche and used to race on weekends. And the girls, Joanne Nail and what's her name, who had done all the soaps. They were supposed to win the race, by the way, originally. So a whole bunch of us got back and forth down there, and we would fool around until we burned out the brakes, which you do pretty quickly because it turns out when you go into a turn or a corner, as they call it, at speed, you don't pump the brakes. You hit the brakes once hard, bang, like that. And then you don't hit the brakes again, because if you've timed it out right, that you hit the brakes and that slows it enough for you to start your turn into the corner, and you don't have to brake again. This was also the days fairly recently when race cars required the driver to do something called heel toe, which is your left foot is a clutch. Your right foot has to handle both the brake and the accelerator. And it's a dance back and forth between brake, clutch, hit the accelerator to raise the accelerator speed, so when the clutch re-engages, it's going at the same rate the car is going. Because if it isn't, it'll stop it or it'll race the engine and no good thing happens. So all of this is what's involved in driving these, not the Datsun. The whole idea was that we were not supposed to drive anyway. We were supposed to be towed, because what they did in those days for car movies was they towed the car, and the driver faked the wheel action and talked to his passenger. Then they stopped the car and they changed the cameras and all the rest of it. And then you're back out and they're towing it. And what you're facing as you're being towed is the back of the camera car with the camera crew and the cinematographer and the director and the sound people and the script supervisor and all of those people sitting, and they're all doing what they're doing. And that's how they did car movies. And when they backed off to do the stunts, they drove 20, maybe 25 miles an hour. And they stopped down the camera, which shoots 32 frames a second. They stopped it down maybe 31 or 31 and a half. Not very much, but that gave the illusion of speed. Chuck didn't want to do that. Chuck wanted to shoot speed for speed, speed for speed, which meant he needed to get the camera car up to 100 miles an hour. So, okay, he started running into people who had various driving histories. Raul, God love him, had driven nothing other than an occasional VW in Manhattan, but he didn't really drive at all. Who drives in New York? So they brought him out. God bless him. He flew. I guess he was doing a show at the time. He flew out on the red eye. I met him on a bus. We had a little bus that toward the end of our training period would take us up to Willow Springs, which is a track north of Los Angeles, which is a proper big, pretty good-sized racetrack where they do a lot of testing. And it's been in a lot of movies. And you can open it up a little more there. And Raul was slumped over in the bus going up to Willow Springs. He's going to have a driving lesson. Well, Raul has had no idea about driving for speed or any of the rest of it. His idea of slowing up the car is to put your foot on the brake, which you cannot do more than 90 miles an hour. You have to gear down. Raul doesn't know about gearing down, and he's half asleep to begin with. However, we get through the driving lesson without any accidents. And some people get good, some people so-so, some people don't trust them to do anything. Speed for speed, speed for speed. That's all we kept hearing. Okay, fine. In the meantime, they cast Michael, which was not an easy thing to do because he wasn't really crazy about the idea. It turned out he had had a kind of a bad car crash in a sports car in the recent past. But Guy McElwain was a friend of his and kind of talked him into it and sweetened the deal a little bit, which I did not know for some time. And that was he got promised one of the cars at the end of the movie. That helped persuade him. So we're off to New York, and that's when it starts to get really fun. New York is where the race begins. And New York is where we will shoot all sorts of footage of the little cars darting through the city streets. We go off to New York, and it was, of all times of the year, it was Christmas. I don't know whether you've been in Manhattan for Christmas, but it's a time to go because the city has a whole different feeling, a great sort of party atmosphere all over. And the crowds on the street, they're not the head-down herds that you see, the Fifth Avenue shots. They're looking and they're laughing and they're celebrating. Well, in the meantime, we are getting set up to drive in the streets. Now, we will be driving loose. We won't be pulled because we've got to get out of the garage and we've got to take various routes. So the biggest question is, are they going to be able to rig the cameras to the cars so that we can drive as fast as we dare? Because the stunt drivers, do 20, 25 miles. No. The Chuck keeps saying, really honking, really smoking. He kept talking about big clanging balls. Tim McIntire did a whole routine imitating Chuck, talking about his big clanging balls. He wants us to go fast. Okay, well, he's got a whole bunch of stunt drivers. Now, the stunt drivers, while we're in New York, have to do a lot of stunt footage. And they are not used to doing stunt footage fast. It's a whole new set of instincts and reflexes. So the very first day of shooting, which is a very big deal on any movie, especially cars and stunt drivers, everything, there were some problems. They're shooting down on Wall Street, and they're doing stunts, and they sideswipe 6 parked cars. None of them ours. Bang, 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 bang. Because the stunt driver, Chuck is saying, faster, faster. Stunt driver loses it. Bang, 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 bang. 6 sideswiped cars. They do some kind of stunt they're trying to do in front of the Delmonico restaurant, and the driver loses it, skids off the road, takes a hydrant off right at the curb, water. Not supposed to happen. And in the meantime, the camera mounts are not really secure, and the picture is probably going to be a little jiggly. So in the meantime, we are getting set up to keep going because it's a movie, it's Warner Brothers, it's production manager's got this big bag full of cash, and he's going around paying people off, and speed for speed for speed. So the first time Michael and I drove was some footage. This in the movie is after we have exited the garage. We're coming up Park Avenue South, and we're headed toward the Grand Central. I forget what they call it, but there's a passageway through the Grand Central that puts you down on Lower Park Avenue. And then we're going to go up Park Avenue to 47th, 8th or something, hang a left, and head west. And we're going to be driving loose. So what that means when you're driving loose is they've got the camera rig on the side of the car, and they have the recorder on your feet, or by your feet on the bottom floor of the car, and you make your own sticks to imitate the sticks for the cutting, and you set off. You're driving off. Well, okay. Really honking, really moving, big clanging balls. we look at each other and say, what the hell? I mean, besides, we got the traffic controlled. It's supposed to be very early in the morning, so there aren't any cars we have to worry about. So and Michael is used to driving a sports car, so we're driving, we're going pretty fast, what we think is pretty fast. And in the Cobra, it all feels very fast anyway. So we come shooting right at the Grand Central, which comes very quickly at us, and we go zipping back and forth and down the incline and hit the bottom of the road where there is, of course, a grate. There's a grate there. The Cobra is not really all that stable to begin with. And when it hits the grate, it bounces off at an angle. And it kind of goes at an angle toward the side of Park Avenue. And Sarrazin is fighting the wheel, and he finally gets it back, and he doesn't lose it, thank God. And we go straight down to 47th, and he takes a big breath, and he just goes left, and we go about a half a block, and we stop, and we look at each other. And we both think, what the fuck have we gotten ourselves into? And in the meantime, Chuck comes racing up, and he says, that's terrific, but we got to do it again, because when you hit the bottom of the road, you kind of skid it off at an angle. And we said, we know. We were there. We know we did that. He said, we know. That looks like you kind of lost it for a minute. We said we did. So, okay. In the meantime, in addition to this, the streets, the sidewalks are filled with people because it's a movie. And, who's in the movie and what are they doing? And it's supposed to be 6 o'clock in the morning because there's no traffic, but the streets are filled with people. And we said to Chuck, well, what are you going to do about the streets filled with people? He said, don't worry about it. You won't notice them. Oh, no? Okay. So we do it 2 or 3 more times, and we get a little better and a little calmer and a little faster. And I get a little more nervous each take because Michael has got his hands full with the car and steering it and everything else. I don't have anything to do except sit there and watch the world coming at me. So I think I better figure out something to occupy my hands at any rate. I decide I need a stopwatch, and I need a map, and I need a compass, and I need sunglasses. I need a whole lot of stuff to keep myself busy. So in the meantime, we have all of the other racers and their cars and their routines. So it's a busy time, and the stunt drivers are trying to stay out of trouble. So finally comes the big day, the start of the race, which is probably my favorite part of the movie. The start of the race, I think they really nailed it. The whole business with Norman Burton and the car, and Michael Sarrazin and the nuts, and then dropping the sack, and Norman is sitting there with the sounds and the fury over his face, the quiet of the city streets. And we shot, it was a garage, I think it was in the East 30s, it was a garage we all came shooting out of. And that transition, that sound transition, when the sound hits the echoing city streets and Norman sits up and the opening, the whole thing, beautiful. I love that part of it. And then they intercut the various things that we had all done. And it just works wonderfully until you get to the Jersey Turnpike. And I'm busy doing things with my stopwatch. I don't even know where we are. I'm making notes. And it seems to me we are going faster than a bat out of hell. We're not really, but in that little car, it seems like it. Terrific. Everybody is really happy with the New York footage. Speed for speed, speed for speed. We get to the Jersey Turnpike. It's a whole new game. We got the camera car, and we got all the things that you need to get tied to the camera car. And the rigging is different now because the camera's in front of us, and it can shoot down at us, and we don't need side shots. And we're sitting there. I can't remember. I think your front wheels are off the ground. I think your back wheels are on the ground. And they start off down the Jersey Turnpike. Well, all of those people on the back of the camera car create this enormous wind draft that sweeps down over the car and takes their faces and pulls them back like people on rocket sleds. We can't talk very well. We can't get out of the breeze because they're creating it. And the funniest thing of all is these are the days in which everybody's supposed to go 55 miles an hour. Not the Jersey Turnpike. The Jersey Turnpike has always had a 60-mile limit. Whether it's all of the people on the back of the truck or whether, as we all thought, it was the camera truck guy lying to us, he's barely doing 60. He's barely nursing it up to 70. In the meantime, we're talking as best we can about how fast we're going and how easy it is. In the meantime, that the other drivers on the Jersey Turnpike see this contraption going by, and they say, what the hell is that? So they pull up, and they are driving alongside of us, and they are looking out the window and pointing at each other and at us. And in the meantime, we are saying, wow, we are certainly making good time, and everybody's driving the same speed. So big conference, because we can't make the rest of the movie. We can't do it. So the decision is made that the actors who are in the race will have to do their own driving. And as far as the gags go, the set pieces, that where the cars nearly collide with each other, the stunt guys can do that. And the stunt guys will do that the way they do everything, 20, 25 miles an hour with a lot of handbrake. And they do that once. The first time they try to do that, Chuck has a hissy fit and said, no. So he's busy restaging all of that so they can drive faster. And in the meantime, it is necessary for there to be shots of the cars driving by or driving in relationship to each other. The actors are doing the driving. We are reporting to a base camp, and they put the cameras, they put the rigs back on the side of the car, and the sound guy sets up the recording equipment, and they rig the lights such as we can carry, and they send us off, and we drive whatever we're driving, and we play whatever scenes, the dialogue we're doing, and then we go back to base camp, and the technicians reach in and turn things off and make sure we actually got the scene. And in the meantime, they're all getting hazard pay because, they're out in the base camp turning on machines and turning off machines. Anyway, what we discover is that everybody has not told us the truth about anything connected with this because we need them to do stuff that just can't be done. We need a lot of highway footage, and we've got to use federal highways to shoot it. The state of Arizona tells us that they will close a federal highway. You're not supposed to be able to close a federal highway. Okay, they'll close a federal highway. They get our business. So all of a sudden, it's a big country, but it's no bigger than Arizona because everything after the Jersey Turnpike is Arizona. We go to Arizona. We have two locations. One is in Phoenix, and the other is in Flagstaff, where we spent most of the time. It turned out that Arizona was lying about their highways. Whoa, who told you that? Should close a federal highway? No. What they promised to do was to patrol the highway. Okay, that means they're going to be around. Okay, I guess that's good. How it actually works is the camera crew is about a half a mile down the highway, and they're on an overpass with their camera crews and their lights and the script and all those people. And we are in the picture car. If it's our shot, we have a walkie-talkie, and we say, "This is the picture car. Are you ready for us?" And they say, and we say, "This is a picture car. Would you come ahead?" Well, what do you think? Shall we come? And finally, Sarrazin said, "Oh, for Christ's sake," and we're coming. And he throws it down, and bang, we go off the we're in the middle of the highway. We're on in the middle part where the sand is, and we go racing out of there, really honking, really steaming, really pushing, headed toward the overpass in traffic with cars all around us. Now, the cars are doing 55, maybe 60, maybe a little more than that. We are doing minimum 120. You see these cars, first gear in the Cobra and the Ferrari and the Porsche. First gear takes you up to 90. Then you shift into second gear. That takes you up to 120. Then third gear takes you up to 140. And fourth gear takes you as much above 140 as you have the stomach to travel. So when you accelerate in these cars, you're going 90 miles an hour in first gear. They don't know that. The other drivers don't know that. They look in the rearview mirror and they see this little blue car, and they look again and it's right there. We are threading our way through traffic as best we can, going as fast as we can. And as we approach the overpass, they see all this stuff going on above, all the cameras pointing on, and they slow down. They slow down and look around and see what's happening. Sometimes we just had to abort and go back into not to count the times when we are so far away that nobody can see the guys on the underpass, or the guys on the overpass. And we're start off, and one of the patrolmen pulls up behind us with the siren, and he's all excited because he thinks he's got a real one. He's got somebody going 90 miles an hour. We got so they wouldn't even stop. They would just drive by and say, "Are you in that goddamn movie?" All right. The incredible thing that happened was that there were no accidents. Nobody got hurt. Nobody ever got hurt, except on the very last day of shooting, the motorcyclist finally catches up with the rest of the party at the Queen Mary parking lot, goes sailing through the parking lot and off the ramp into the water and broke his wrist. That's the only thing that ever happened. Otherwise, we all survived. It was a remarkable experience. They were just terrific. Tim McIntire is a rock musician, was a rock musician, and as well as being as close to Hollywood royalty as we had in the movie. His father was John McIntire, and his mother was equally well known. I can't think of her name now. He was terrific. Raul was terrific. And there was only one problem, and that is it's not as funny as it was on the page. Yeah, I noticed this the first time I saw it with an audience. As we approach something funny, there was like a surge in the theater, and the joke never landed. It didn't get funny. It didn't get funny. It was funnier in French, but that's because people are speaking faster, and that kind of gave it some energy. The problem was this. I didn't know enough at the time. It's shooting comedy. It's fascinating. You've got a funny thing, a gag, a line, or a situation, piece of action, something. If you draw a circle around it, 360 degrees, there's one, maybe two, usually only one angle from which it's funny, from which it shoots funny. There's a famous story told about Mike Nichols when he was shooting Catch-22, and Orson Welles came to do his bit, and they came to the set for the first shot, and Mike Nichols was supervising the cameraman setting up for the first shot, and he happened to glance over at Orson Welles, and and Mike Nichols shook his head. Orson Welles shook his head. So, well, where then? I'll put it here. Okay? And Orson Welles shook his head. And finally, Mike Nichols put it there, and Orson Welles did this. If you don't have that angle, the audience doesn't laugh. And there's a whole movie that illustrates this, and nobody has ever pointed it out. It's a mad, 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 mad world. The first sequence, the death of Jimmy Durante on the road, is funny because I don't know, by luck or by somehow they got the right point of view. For the entire rest of the whole huge movie, and they've got every comedian that ever existed and Ethel Merman, and they aren't funny until the very end when Spencer Tracy comes on and they were all scared of him. And the movie kind of settles down a little bit. If you don't have that angle, and this is something that they all learned when they were starting out, with all those 1 and 2 reelers and all those setups and all those people like George Stevens, who started off as a gag man, people whose business it was to find that angle. And Chuck, he never had it. And it was a shame because the script was hilarious.
What was it like working with Michael Sarrazin?
It was great. Very, very bone dry sense of humor. He was the only one of the drivers who had a car crash. It was on the Hollywood freeway, and it was one of the scenes about our approaching Los Angeles. And we shot, it was the first shot of the day, and he was a little bit sleepy, and we got out into traffic, and we were inching along, and the way traffic does when you're on the freeway, and a gap opened up in front of us, and he touched the accelerator and then got his feet kind of mixed up and bang into the back of this car in front of us. Well, their big day, Warner Brothers just rear-ended you. And nobody got hurt, but he got roundly teased for that. He did most of the driving, which was quite fine with both of us. But there was a sequence in which my character had to drive. And it turned out to be one of the more complicated parts of the film because A, it's at night, and B, it was outside of Flagstaff on the twisty, turning mountain roads. And it is the scene where Bannon and Graves overtake Smith and Franco. So I had to be driving, and I had to be driving such that I was behind a car and you could see what car it was. And then I pulled out and passed, and then he was behind me, and we're doing a pretty good, we're poking along pretty well. And it was a sequence in which we had to do a pretty careful amount of driving, and then we had to be covered by stunt drivers who were going to fill in the driving that wouldn't obviously use us. And our stunt drivers were the 2 guys who had taken us to the California tracks. However, what nobody counted on was the fact that this was their chance to shine. This was their chance not only to deliver the shots it needed, but to open it up a little bit. And I remember we kept coming back to put film in the camera and get set up and go out and do something else and come back. I became aware that they seemed, Wes Dawn particularly, Wes seemed a little bit antsy, a little bit excited. Well, there was a tricky part of the sequence, and that is it was a long corner. It wasn't a sharp corner. It was a right turn that just seemed to go on forever. And then just when you thought it was going to straighten out, it kept turning. So the chaos and people back and forth and the camera crew, and it's night. And Michael, this was the only time Michael really had to ride for any length of time. And he was terrified. He was absolutely terrified. And he couldn't even use any of my gadgets if he wanted to. So it was dark. And so his solution was to get drunk and go to sleep, which I thought was probably very bright, except it made it conversations kind of one-sided. But all he did was grunt anyway. And all this chaos, I see myself trying to say, now, Wes, there's this long right turn. Be careful because it keeps turning. And he's kind of nodding. So the result is he didn't and skidded, lost it, and went off the road. Well, he couldn't go very far off the road because it was too many trees around. And he was not hurt, thank God. But we pretty much wrapped a Mitchell 800 camera, and that's unbelievably expensive. So they had to have another meeting at Warner Brothers, and Wes got a ticket back to Los Angeles. Those were the only accidents. Michael was just great, and the car that he decided to pick was the Mercedes. We had that classic convertible, the one that just kept going up and up and up in value, and I think he was very happy with it.
It feels like there were probably a lot of actors that you didn't really even get to interact much with other than those beginning and ending scenes.
You didn't get a chance to interact with anybody except who you were driving with. The result was it was a more cohesive group than might otherwise have been, because everybody was around for the whole time, for the whole shoot. It was 16 weeks, I think. The big controversy over who wins the race. The girls were supposed to win the race. Yeah, that was one of the best parts of the script. Leon was way ahead of his time. But the girls were the girls. The whole tone of the shoot and Chuck was so chauvinistic, they didn't have a chance. They felt it very strongly. Joanne was pretty cool about everything, but her older sister, Susan Flannery, she was really pissed the whole movie because she felt male pigs all over the place. And Michael was a star. He wasn't supposed to be the star, but he was a star. So we were going to win. However, there was another unexpected surprise in store for us. And that is, whenever you win something in a movie and people rush to congratulate you, tuck your head in, pull your arms in, cover your head, and because they just beat the living crap out of you. If you watch them closely, if you ever see a movie where they do that, everybody's patting you on the back, but they're all looking for screen time. So they figure if they pat you very hard, they'll see themselves in the shot. Such that when I went on later to make a movie called Risky Business, we started shooting. We were in Chicago, and the first night we shot, I met Janet Carroll, who played my wife, and she was very excited to be doing the film. And she said, "You're much more experienced than I am. Do you have any advice?" And I said, "Yes, watch out for the locals." She said, "Oh, okay, I'll keep that in mind." What I did not know was that she was a local. They had found her in Chicago. It came up in Risky Business or something. It came and patted us on the back for doing something. It was a remarkable experience. And I give Chuck full credit for being able to manage the whole thing.
Do you remember how was the movie received when it came out?
There wasn't a star, and there wasn't really anybody in there whom anybody recognized, by and large. Warner's, God love them, thought that if it did any kind of business at all, they would be willing to go and do a sequel in Africa for the big race there. And that's what the end of the movie is all about, is to set up the sequel. It never was. But it didn't, it was very forgettable. And it's a shame because, well, mostly for Leon's script. He's one of those screenwriters who was born to write movies. And it was obvious from a very early age. When he was in elementary school, he was a fifth grader, sixth grade, and he wrote all by himself a story called The History of the Machine Gun. And he showed it to his teacher, and she was amazed. And it happened that a third grade teacher was sick with something, and they were having a terrible time keeping the kids behaved. And so in desperation, they got Leon down to tell them the history of the machine gun. And he could just rattle off scenes. There's one that was a favorite of his that I never quite pulled off. I can't remember, but at one point in the course of the trip, we get a little bleary, we get a little shell-shocked, and Graves suddenly summarizes the theory of relativity. I don't think it's in the movie, or if it is, it doesn't make any sense particularly. I couldn't do it. But Leon just tossed it off. It's just, it's a wonderful script. Is Gary still around? Gary Busey?
He is. I don't know how cognizant he is right now.
He wasn't terribly cognizant then.
Because he's always blowing that whistle in the movie. It's like, did he just bring that with him, or was that part of the character?
I forgot the whistle. He might very well have brought it with him. He was very young and had mostly been a big-time college football player, University of Oklahoma. I think probably the whistle was his idea. I remember shooting the scenes where we were all gathering at Gallagher's Steakhouse in New York City. And for me, it was a great treat, the whole location there, because I had only just recently moved to California. I had been in New York the whole time. I remember watching Gary crossing Upper Broadway or Upper 7th Avenue, wherever, against Times Square, looking like a cowboy. It was remarkable.
It's very funny how many times over the last 2-3 months, Stephen Keats just keeps popping up in movies that I've been watching.
Stephen was pretty much a firecracker. Our paths kept crossing at auditions. I never did anything else with him. But I remember that he had a very complicated domestic situation. He lived out in Reseda at a time when Reseda was way out. And I remember one night, a whole bunch of us wound up at his house. We saw each other afterwards, which is also unusual. At least it was in my experience. I got a call one night from Tim McIntire, who had just seen Smile. He'd never seen Smile before. And he loved it, and he thought I was wonderful in it. And I wound up spending some time with them. He played fiddle in a rock band that he and John Rubinstein put together. And they were very eager to score Gumball. And they were very put out when they didn't get the job. They hated the score.
Especially if they thought they could do better.
I think anybody could have done better. Dominic was boop, 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 boop. Well, oddly enough, the score is, though it was years and years before the movie, is very reminiscent of the score for It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. Sort of popcorny.
I wanted to ask you what you've been working on lately. I was very surprised when you showed up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That was great to see you.
Thank you. I was surprised too. Marvel is very super electronic, which I guess you would expect. And I am obviously not. If you can see how I've been wrestling with these earphones, I have no sense of that at all. But when you audition, or when I audition, you get sent a script, or you get sent, it might be a dummy scene. No one will tell you. Well, what is this? Just say the words. Just go ahead with it. Well, I did Elderly Retainer. And what's that all about? I don't know. So a couple of weeks passed, and then I get an email from them saying, "Can you make him evil?" And I said, "Sure. Give me something evil to do." No, same scene, but evil. And that's all they would tell me. They wouldn't tell me why. I don't know what the hell I did, but whatever I did, they thought was evil. So, P.S., I got the job. It took a long time for them to tell me that there was a little piece of script, because I hadn't read the script. I had no idea who was doing anything to what. There was a little scene later in the movie when he blows up a bus full of rebel soldiers. But they couldn't come out and tell me that. Everything very close to the vest. I don't know. Everybody, I suppose, worried about. Same thing happened when I was working on Hunger Games. I was so paralyzed with fear that somebody's going to reveal a plot point 6 months before the picture is released. And then the shooting is very odd, because I was lucky in that there was actually a scene or some kind of continuity involved in what was happening on the plane, which was a rare thing in the film. And I spoke to the director I said, this is a very long scene. And she said, yes, the script is like that. There are long scenes and then action, and long scenes and then action. They hired a linguist to create a language that was spoken by some of the people in the film, but not all of the people. And if anybody wanted to spend the time and effort, I was promised would parse out, would be perfectly understandable, would be perfectly and gobbledygook. But they had her, and she, bless her heart, she corrected pronunciation. Thank God I only had 2 lines. Oh, yes, and it was the longest meal penalty I've ever had in 60, 70 years of doing this. They just kept working. They didn't stop to eat. And as a result, I think I had a meal penalty that was 8 hours, 9 hours or something. I don't know. I finally was eating tuna fish on the plane. They don't care. I did another film that I very much enjoyed doing that was fairly recent called Dr. Sleep with Ewan McGregor. But it's a very dark, dark film. Every once in a while, something comes along.
I'm glad you're still working. Are you currently doing anything right now?
No, at the moment, I am happily hiding with Christina. We're very lucky. We live in a beautiful place on the shore, on the water, and except for being hot, and it's hot all over. We couldn't be happier.
Mr. Pryor, thank you so much for your time. It is always such a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Cannonball.
Old Cannonball is going to be passing you like you weren't even there.
Anyone can enter and anything goes in a squealing, smashing outlaw race across America.
I want to make a little bet on the Trans-American Grand Prix. Can you handle $20,000?
Gentlemen know each other, don't you? Mr. Redmond, Mr. Buckman.
I believe we run into each other once or twice.
It's a cross-country demolition derby.
I mean to win this one. And if you so much as come within 100 miles of me, you're going to wind up with my tire tracks right up your...
The winner gets $100,000. The losers keep what's left of their cars.
Nice, huh?
Get me the highway patrol.
We're trying to get a word here with Brad Phillips, organizer of the race. Brad, tell me, your race has been called an outlaw sporting event. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, the police and safety officials around the country get upset because our drivers tend to exceed the speed limits.
One speeding ticket and you're back in prison.
Oh, God, there's trouble.
It's a freeway free-for-all that hits with the impact of a head-on collision.
I thought this car could beat anything on the road.
This car the winner.
Cannonball.
All right, we are back and we were talking about the Cannonball Run. But first, really, let's talk about Cannonball a little bit. It came out the same year as the Gumball Rally. Cannonball, I don't know how successful the movie is, but there are a lot of things that are really damn fun to watch about it, especially if you're a fan of AIP, the whole Corman camp, because every Corman alum seems to have something going on in here. We've got Dick Miller. We've got Mary Warnoff. This is directed by Paul Bartel. Co-written by Don Simpson. Hello. Got cameos in here from so many of the major directors. You've got your Joe Dantes, your Arkish, you've got your Martin Scorsese. You've got a little cameo in here by Sylvester Stallone. You've got David Carradine leading this. You've got another Carradine Robert in tow. You've got so many just amazing actors. But I have to say, it feels like a pale imitation of a movie that is yet to come. It feels like Cannonball Run. And it also feels like a really watered down version of Death Race. It doesn't feel like there was that passion that Death Race 2000 had. I love Death Race 2000. And this one just feels like the poor relations to that.
Sir, the fact that you did not mention The leader of the Juicy Fruits, sir?
Oh boy, not only the leader of the Juicy Fruits, but also Beef himself.
Beef himself!
So good.
Oh my God. Yeah. What a strange mix of Death Race 2000 and Cannonball Run, or Gumball Rally, I guess. Like, what a weird mix of the two. Like you said, Father Malone, I think it goes to show it doesn't really work if you do it both ways.
Paul Bartel did not want to do this movie, felt that after doing Death Race, he was being pigeonholed as some sort of, car director. So he brought a lot of menace to the movie that was maybe not necessarily warranted. I'm speaking really at the end, that pile up, like speaking of unexpected endings.
My God.
And murderous intent. My God, like he really wanted all of those characters to die and all of us to revel in their deaths. So yeah, it's a schizophrenic movie. I don't think it isn't served in any way by David Carradine being the lead. Now listen, I love David Carradine, and I think he's great as Frankenstein, the unknowable, you're not supposed to like this guy who has some sort of hidden agenda. But like as a romantic lead in a film, he's maybe a bit of a cold fish, so that works against it. But like everything else is kind of working for it because it is Paul Bartel and it is this incredible stable of Corman regulars and luminaries, and it is a mini Phantom of the Paradise reunion. And the car stuff is fantastic. Like really, all of these movies, the car stuff is so dangerous, but it feels really dangerous in Cannonball, more so than in the other ones. How can you go wrong? We're a scene where Paul Bartel and Martin Scorsese and Sylvester Stallone are eating fried chicken together.
I also love how Father Malone loves making unintentional puns. Dead fish talking about David Carradine's koi. Come on. David Carradine, I have not seen him in enough things. I've seen him in Kill Bill, but I haven't seen Kill Bill since it came out. Yeah, I agree, Father Malone. He's not... Oh, man. This movie... Robert Carradine is really good in this movie, and that's the problem with this movie. Is Robert Carradine is so good that you're like, can we get the other Carradine for a while? Because, like, you're really bumming me out, David Carradine. Like, you're too serious. Because this movie is fun in moments, but, yeah, it's also tonally inconsistent in a way that I was not expecting.
Well, the way that it starts with this dream sequence of him driving this car, the guy behind him asking him all these pointed questions, Veronica Hamill in the passenger seat with a blindfold on, and they end up killing her. And it's just this whole thing of like, oh, you're going to kill her like you killed this other woman. And then when you find out that he actually didn't kill this other woman, that it was actually Archie Hahn who was drunk and murdered this person, and you're like, he took the fall for it, so why is he feeling guilty about this? This is wrong that he feels guilty.
All the while Archie Hahn is laughing about it because it's hilarious to drunk drive and kill someone, isn't it? He's like, oh yeah, he took the fall for me. It's like, what
this
the
movie
fuck?
Is way too heavy for its own good. I mean, and what you just said, Chris, about having Robert Carradine in it, like they obviously went with, let's go with the, grizzled old timer who's got a last chance at redemption, when they surely should have gone with the up and coming youngster and had Robert Carradine step in the role, because if him like racing for this young love like story, I would have been all about it. Like it would have been a definite rival for Gumball Rally. Instead, it's like we said, just sort of it doesn't feel right.
Well, and it's even better at the end of the movie. David Carradine essentially goes, "Hey, bro, fuck you," and just lets his brother die. Like. What? Again, it's a tonally just like, it's spastic. It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to be this fun movie where Garrett Graham is playing the guitar like an asshole in this car while the guy who is forcing men to be raped by other men in Deliverance chuckles along? Like, or do you want to be a serious movie where like 30 people explode at the end? Like, I had a hard time figuring this movie out. I liked it, but I had a really hard time figuring out what the movie's kind of interior logic was, because I think it's almost completely devoid of it.
But Garrett Graham, the lighthearted moments in the movie keep it buoyant, and in my mind, it's still a better movie than Cannonball Run. I don't think I will seek out Cannonball to watch again like I will Gumball Rally, but like, if it's on, I'm going to watch it. It is fun. As insane as it is, like, it's no less insane than any other thing that was coming out of Corman. studios in the 60s and 70s. So all of its faults don't ultimately tarnish it beyond recognition, particularly with what's going to follow.
And that scene where Paul Bartel is playing the piano and Dick Miller is getting the shit kicked out of him is the best scene in this movie. Period. Put a fucking pin in it, baby.
Every time Bartel is playing the piano and singing his Cole Porter-esque type songs, I'm like, yes, I'm here for this. This is great. And when he answers questions with the lyrics from the songs, I'm like, yes, this is genius right here.
Benny, come on in, sit down. You like Cole Porter?
Yeah, sure.
Listen to this, something I'm writing myself. Oh, how I'll cry when you go. Then I'll be missing you so. That's all I got. What do you think?
Yeah, it's nice, yeah. So, what do you say, Lester? You cover me for the 50,000?
Oh, how I hate to say no.
That isn't Cole Porter, Lester.
That scene where Dick Miller is having his ass beat and Paul Bartel's playing the song about how he's having his ass beat is just inspired.
Before we leave this, so many great faces, so many good times to just see, Carl Gottlieb showing up and him and Machine Gun Joe's squeezed along for the ride as well. I love all that stuff. There's so many great just appearances by characters and even Corman himself, where we're going to be talking about how he's leading the FBI or CIA here pretty soon. So.
And they have another crazy European in this movie who gets blown up pretty unceremoniously quickly in. So
I felt so dumb because I'm just like, how did he blow up? And then it took me a while to be like, oh yeah, you idiot. Those people were putting stuff under his car at the very beginning, but I had no idea whose car they were putting it under. I didn't know who these guys were. I'm just like, what am I missing? There's a lot of weird lines that aren't drawn in this movie.
That's Paul Bartel leaving breadcrumbs, just so you'll go back and rewatch and understand what the actual plan was.
And it was nice too. Joe McBride, who's been on the show several times, he's in here as a reporter at the very end. So it's interesting.
Mike, before we started recording, I mentioned that I had been familiar with Gumball Rally, as a kid, and Cannonball Run ad nauseum on cable, when we were growing up. But one night, Cannonball came on, and I thought, it's Gumball Rally, and I'm watching until I saw Carl Gottlieb, and I went, I don't think the screenwriter of Jaws is in the Gumball Rally. What the fuck am I watching?
I just want that outfit that Garrett Graham is wearing.
It's pretty spectacular, isn't it?
As Perman Walters. What a great name. What just a goofy ass role. That should have been in Gumball Rally. That character is better suited in that movie. 100%.
Oh, yeah. He's like the troubadour and this whole thing of him trying to get fame and doing radio.
And that's a nice thread, too. The fact that they're in the car and that the thing is playing on the radio is a little bit of Vanishing Point, but a little better in a way.
And I love that it's the neck of his guitar that ultimately undoes that guy and just fucks him over at the end. I'm like, yes, thank you.
That is this movie's Speed moment, because that is right out of Speed. It's that whole premise with the jumping, right? Because it's I can't make the jump. In Speed, they don't have a choice. I guess he doesn't have a choice in this movie, though. You could convince me he could have just driven past him, and kind of ducked down. But it's much more exciting to watch him fly off the bridge. And I like that shot of David Carradine where it's kind of in his lap, and you see him go off the bridge, and he's just kind of whatever. You can see him his character just being well, if I die, I die. And then it clears the thing and you hear that ting. And I was like, man, that's Paul Bartel has an eye for this stuff. Even if he didn't want to do it again, he still had an eye for it.
So are we to believe that David Carradine's character was in a way psychic? Because he dreamed the ending of this movie. He just dreamed it in a different order. And that's the way psychics operate. You don't understand exactly what you've been given. You're just given the clues.
That's unexplained. I didn't understand the opening bit at all.
This is the story of an average guy and a beautiful girl.
Hi.
Don't tell me your name. I'll just call you Beauty.
You must be a sensitive person. I bet you're a fan of Rod McEwen's.
I try to be.
And his best friend.
I am Captain Chaos. Been a cop long?
and a family doctor.
Come on right here.
And how they all set out one day in an ambulance from New York to California at 150 miles per hour.
California, here we come.
But they aren't the only ones. Because this is the Cannonball Run, America's illegal Grand Prix. And it doesn't matter how you get there. It's who gets there first. Burt Reynolds is the defending champion. On his team, Farrah Fawcett.
Are you one of those volleyballers?
Cannonballs.
Dom DeLuise and Jack Elum. And here comes the competition.
Will you hurry up, you little...
Dean Martin.
We happen to be in a race.
Sammy Davis Jr.
You, Shorty. Where'd you get all that jewelry?
Take a left.
Mel Tillis and Terry Bradshaw. Jackie Chan. And Roger Moore as himself.
I'm Roger Moore. Who? Roger Moore.
All of them. Reckless.
We're in kind of a hurry, so if you could just bless it and then we'll be...
Unscrupulous.
Oh, I gotta bless her. Oh, I'm sorry, Father. She's a Zen Buddhist.
Desperate characters.
Ready, fire!
By land, by sea, by air. They'll do anything, drive anything, say anything.
It's hard to understand you.
When I called you, I was doing 140 miles an hour.
And stop at nothing.
Normally I drive right around the speed limit.
We all make mistakes, miss. But 160?
To win the Cannonball Run.
Yeah, we're looking good.
Come on, faster!
Cannonball Run. The only movie to get over 200 tickets before it even opens.
That's Cannonball. Perfect.
Cannonball Run. Interestingly enough, written by the guy, Brock Yates, who actually was part of the inspiration of the actual Cannonball race, which, yeah, he is Cannonball. He's the guy who did this, so he's the guy who ends up penning this film. This is a movie, this is another pairing of Hal Needham, former stuntman Hal Needham, who ended up becoming a director and mostly is known for, in my mind anyway, the Smokey and the Bandit series, also Stroker Ace, also one of the best movies ever made in the entire world, Megaforce. I know a lot of people love Body Slam. I still haven't seen that one. Rad, he did as well. Death Car on the Freeway. If people have not seen Death Car on the Freeway, you have to see Death Car on the Freeway. It is so much fun, and it is a really interesting treatise on women in the workplace. But also the director of Hooper, which I fucking love too. But speaking of Cannonball Run, so this is another pairing of Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds. And basically, did you like Gumball Rally? Because we can do that again, but with a lot of bigger stars. There are some things. Now, I will say, like, you guys have been slagging on this movie this whole time. I fucking love this movie still. Though I will admit that I mixed this movie and Cannonball Run 2 up a lot. Like, I kept waiting for Richard Kiel to show up. I forgot that he's not in this. I think he's just in the second one. But, man, say whatever you want. But if you guys talk bad about Jack Elum as the doctor, we're going to have words.
Are you turning the show over to us for the next 20 minutes to shit talk the movies? I'm kidding. I'm kind of surprised. I'm not, though, because from the sound of it with both of y'all, this is something that was just like constantly being bombarded to you on TV anyway. So like, if you didn't like it, I would honestly kind of be shocked more than anything else.
I think I might have seen this theatrically. This came out when I was 9 years old. I know for sure I saw the second one theatrically, but I'm pretty sure because I remember this whole thing, which Needham, I think, took from Jackie Chan, or maybe he inspired Jackie Chan, this whole thing of the outtakes at the end and the whole these bleeds right here.
Because if I had enough time, I would take those rosary bleeds and stuff them up your nose.
These bleeds?
Those bleeds, yeah.
If you're gonna take these and shove them up,
I'd take these bleeds here.
That's integral to me. That is my DNA, is these bleeds. Yeah, that's me.
Well, you mentioned Jackie Chan on my show on the Culture Cast. We just talked about Mr. Majestic, which was part of this 6-movie deal that Golden Harvest did. Because Cannonball Run is one of these other movies that was included in that deal, which I have to assume is why Jackie Chan is in this movie.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's so unusual that he's here. It's so unusual that he's playing a Japanese person.
Yeah, which I understand he was unaware of till he got to the set, and then was not in any way pleased that he was going to be playing a Japanese person. And there's no reason for him to be playing a Japanese person.
I mean, the fact that every time their characters show up on screen, it goes dee nee 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 nee. Just clue enough where we're going with any character who's not white, and then you've got Jamie Farr as Abdul Salim Falafel, which sounds like I'm being offensive, but I'm pretty sure that's actually the character's fucking name. That was my issue with this movie versus Gumball. Gumball, it's light caricature. In this movie, it's like hard stereotype. Like to a point where it's like, this is not a stereotype, it's offensive.
And there's no real history. Like there's this whole thing of like Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. don't like J.J. McClure and Victor Prinzem, I believe, is the Dom DeLuise character. They don't like Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise. And I don't know why that is, other than they're the favorites, and Sammy Davis Jr. is going to one of the first people that I remember being canceled, Jimmy the Greek, going to him for these odds and putting all this money on there. Otherwise, I don't know why they dislike each other. And there's this whole thing of like, they have this rivalry, but there's no backstory that I really know of why this is the case. And I have to say, I never noticed until this time watching Cannonball Run just how drunk Dean Martin looks through this entire film.
What? That is the first thing I noticed. His eyes are visibly popping out of his head. He looks fucking trashed. I'm shocked that he managed to make it through filming without looking worse than he does, which is really bad. He looks bloated. It's sad. It's honestly kind of sad.
It is pretty sad. Yeah. He looks like he is just lit throughout so much of this. And I'm amazed that there aren't more outtakes of him flubbing lines, because he just looked like he was 3 sheets to the wind.
You know, guys, I watched this movie. Now, obviously, I've seen it 1 gazillion times, and I believe I saw it theatrically as well, Mike. But I watched it again 2 days ago with a friend of mine who's 30 years old and who had no idea who was on screen. And by the time they're officially getting in the car, she turned to me and said, "This drunk old man is so creepy. What's going on?" And he's just a lech, and like, he's not funny, and like, what is this? And I had to explain to her that we live in a city with a street named after that man.
and that was the whole purpose of his act, essentially. That's the whole act.
I did explain that. I'm like, you do realize that's like 60 years of that performance. Like, that's what we expect from Dean Martin, to be drunk, just not that drunk and not that creepy.
Howard Hawks handled it very well in Rio Bravo. He didn't have to act too much in this movie to play a drunk.
Not as dead.
Not sure he's acting at all.
And poor Farrah Fawcett, what the hell's going on with her and this like tree-loving thing? She has nothing to work with whatsoever.
I know you still like it, Mike, but to me, it's like it feels like why you should never let like an artist's estate dictate how a biopic is made, because like we got 2 like really superior movies based on the guy who actually invented or created this race, and then when he gets to do his, it's the most light entertainment, but the kind of the dumbest and like the most sort of lazily racist and rapey. Like, I don't know.
Well, it does have one of the better gags of the 3 movies, which is the Roger Moore character.
That is interesting, yes, that he's actually a young Jewish boy that has watched too many spy movies. I do love some of his spy parody titles. The Fly That Bugged Me, I really enjoyed that one. His whole scene with his mother I liked a lot, but yeah, that was interesting. That confused the hell out of me as a kid, because I'm just like, he's playing Roger Moore, but he's not Roger Moore, but he is Roger Moore. My little 9-year-old brain just exploded.
I thought he was the guy who is using the name Roger Moore as an actor to play James Bond.
That would have been more interesting.
That's what I thought, and that would have been more interesting, because then it's like, so James Bond, played by Roger Moore, is played by a guy who's not actually... Okay. That's what I thought, that's why I was like, it was kind of an interesting convention. But then, yeah, they do the thing with the gun, just like the Raul Julia character in Gumball. The exact same gag. 100% same fucking gag.
There's even rapey bikers in this one, but the rapey biker happens to be the one and only... Well, Peter Fonda, and you've got Robert Tessier, who we just talked about with Hard Times.
Robert Tessier is the big, bald, muscly dude?
That's right.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I love that guy. What a face.
Why don't you try this side?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, look, as you said, Mike, there are aspects of this movie that, like, are embedded in my consciousness. One of the funniest things to me to this day is when, in the final brawl in Cannonball Run, when Burt Reynolds takes out two guys with ease and goes, give me somebody. And then a guy flies in from out of frame and just wrecks him. Like, that's a great joke. Like, no matter what movie it is. That, and, you know, the confusion with Cannonball Run 2 is also with me, because I kept waiting for an exchange between Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise where Burt Reynolds says, a man cannot eat by bread alone. And Dom DeLuise says, oh, I could, especially a nice big rye, which to me is like one of the funniest things ever. And that's the other thing going for Cannonball Run that the other two movies lack, Dom DeLuise. If you put Dom DeLuise into anything, it's going to be better. Just his laugh is so infectious. Like, I don't think really many of the jokes land in Cannonball Run, if they're any good at all. But every time he makes a joke, I'm going to laugh because he's laughing.
And I like recurring gag of Adrienne Barbeau and the other lady that are in the car. I can't get past Barbeau. She's just amazing. And I just love that whole thing of them constantly being pulled over. This movie, everybody gets pulled over all the time, which is kind of weird compared to the others where the cops, yeah, you got Roscoe trying to stop them, but in this, it's every single time they're getting pulled over at some point.
These guys are bad. They're bad at their job.
They are bad. But I do love this whole thing of her with the long cleavage and pulling out the driver's license. And then when it pays off with Valerie Perrine, it's like, yes, that is such a nice bow on that gag.
Can't top that. She met her match in Valerie Perrine.
Can we go back to Dom DeLuise for a moment? Because Father Malone, I'm shaking over here. I found him what was funny about Dom DeLuise in this movie? I'm genuinely asking you, because the Captain Chaos thing in this movie, every time I wanted to turn the movie off, because I thought, like, I was under the impression that he was like a character that Dom DeLuise did in his act, and it was and when I found out that it wasn't the case, I asked myself, what the fuck was the point of giving it so much screen time?
And he brings it up, like, almost immediately. Like, I thought it was a reveal later on, but it's like
another personality.
It grinds the movie to a halt anytime he shows up, because it's like, what is funny about this? I don't personally get what's funny about his character, because it's just like, it's not funny.
I don't think the Captain Chaos character is particularly funny. I think at the time people were going to laugh at that because here's a lunatic suddenly appearing in this movie. But I think Dom DeLuise just sort of conversationally and like as a character, like him getting out of that airplane and casually walking in, and grabbing the beer and everything, just the sort of comedic jaunt to him. Like, I don't know. I think the guy is very, very funny, and, you know, obviously you don't, but I can't explain to you why I love that man so much, but I do.
And I like Dom DeLuise in other things, because he's in Mel Brooks's stuff, and he's great in that. He's great in History of the World Part 1. It's not a Dom DeLuise issue. It is an issue in this movie almost entirely. The way they write his character, the gag, the main gag, like we've mentioned, that is the singular punchline almost for his character. I had a hard time understanding why they gave it so much screen time, because like there are funnier people in this movie that they like. Burt Reynolds is pretty good in this movie. Unsurprisingly, he's Burt fucking Reynolds. But like, unsurprisingly, he's good. But they give Burt Reynolds less screen time because they give Dom DeLuise more, and it's like, yikes! I'm sorry. It's just weird to me.
I love the chemistry between the two, and
no, the chemistry's good. It's just when it's that Dom DeLuise's Captain Chaos thing, I think just really, I don't know. Sometimes I get hung up on roles in movies like in Fifth Element with Chris Tucker. It's like that for me. It's like I'm almost like you have it so throughout this movie that I'm just like, wow, we're really committing here to this gag. Because the gag's the same over and over. The joke is the same.
I agree with you. That joke to me doesn't work all that well. But I think all of the interpersonal stuff between him and Burt Reynolds, and I think Burt Reynolds, if he's funny ever on screen, it's always because Dom DeLuise is there elevating it.
I mean, I absolutely love that initial outtake that they use at the end of the movie where Burt Reynolds has to slap Dom DeLuise to get him to stop laughing.
No. I could do it.
Like, the whole movie is worth it just for that, really. Like, to see the way that they were behind the camera.
It should have been a 2-hour blooper reel, obviously.
Really? Yeah, yeah.
Going back to my favorite bit, don't tell me that Jack Elum isn't just the best part of this movie. Him with his finger and just...
He's pretty spectacular. Every time he comes, they do that like organ grind every time he comes on screen. Like, oh, it's a monster. They don't need to. That face, and no, obviously I love Jack Elum and everything, but like he's so good here. Like he gets it. Like that level of comedy. Like, I love him in this.
Mind you, an actor not known at all for his comedic stylings, known more for just being a Western actor.
Yeah, and a villainous Western.
Yeah, but a stroke of genius putting him in this movie.
I agree.
Yeah, and his reveal too, his initial reveal, because I didn't even realize he was in this movie. When they reveal him the first time, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, fuck, like, all right, just out in front, huh? Like, good God.
He already has the eye that looks like it's looking off somewhere, and I swear they told him to look someplace else with his other eye, because it looks like his eyes are looking in two different directions and not anywhere near any of the characters that he's talking to.
Well, what do you expect from a graduate of the Knoxville, Tennessee College of Faith Healing?
Holy shit. I'm honored, sir. I'm Dr. Nicholas Van Helsing, professor of proctology and other related tendencies, graduate of the University of Rangoon, and assorted night classes at the Knoxville, Tennessee College of Faith Healing.
You know what Cannonball Run has over the other two movies, though? For me, anyway, it lets the female team win. And they win, well. Like, there's no chicanery going on. Like, she actually gets there. I mean, obviously Captain Chaos is a problem, but I like that they won.
Basically, Captain Chaos is the Franco character. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, oh, someone's in trouble. I must save this baby. And it's like,
but it's a cat. Oh, yuck.
That isn't worth saving, right?
It is worth saving. Yeah. Should we talk about Jamie Farr for a second?
Ba 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 ba.
Like what? Yeah. He was so popular, he came back in the second and third movie.
In the third movie, which I didn't realize. So I've seen Speed Zone before, but I didn't realize that he was in it. I forgot that he was.
He was just so funny the last two times. I mean, making fun of Middle Easterners because, of hundreds of years of history that we can just mine and make fun of is I'm a fan. Personally.
I mean, he is Lebanese, so he comes by it honestly, so.
Yes. Right, exactly. All that buffoonery is okay.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yuck, as they would say.
Oh, boy, yeah. I mean, this is 1981 when this comes out, so we are just, I think the oil crisis might still have been going on, not as bad as it was, but.
But still, it was fresh in everyone's mind.
Oh,
what
boy,
Arabs
yes.
are like, right?
It's really funny when he meets female character and he's like, would you like to join my harem? It's like, wow, movie, could you not have something offensive come out of this character's mouth? Or just like poorly, like just lazy. It's more, frankly, again, I don't want to be the woke millennial asshole that pisses off all of Mike's listeners, but It's not that it's offensive, it's that it's fucking lazy.
It's lazily
and that's
offensive.
The problem.
It's lazily racist.
Which is the worst kind of offensive,
Absolutely.
frankly.
Like, everyone will get this joke, right? And everyone will like it. No, we don't like those jokes. Stop doing those. We don't need to hear the Ricky-Ticky music every time the Japanese characters who aren't even Japanese come on screen.
But they have all the gadgets because they're Japanese. Yeah. They have night vision goggles because they're Japanese.
I still don't get why Jackie's watching Behind the Green Door at some point.
What the hell is that?
I have no earthly idea.
20 miles an hour in the middle of the night watching Beyond the Green Door.
Why are you watching porn and you're not even spanking it, Jackie?
You know what they say? When you gotta go, you gotta go. I mean, it's just...
I mean, at least Jackie gets a chance to fight, but the fight choreography in here is not what it should be. It is.
Hal Needham needs to keep the choreography in the cars, not out. Because anytime they step out of the cars, it's like, fuck, get them back in the cars. Like, maybe don't have them take a fucking detour to John Fiedler or whatever the hell goes. I mean, it's like, keep it in the cars. Because when they're in the cars, it is mildly entertaining.
And there's some good gags in it, and I love Bert Convy. Who doesn't want to see him drive a dirt bike out of an airplane singing I've Gotta Be Me?
Convy is an interesting one because it's just like, where's this guy coming from? Kind of like the Terry Bradshaw and Mel Tillis pairing where I'm just like, are you guys in this movie? Are you not? I heard that those characters are so popular that Needham tried to spin them off into their own thing, but I've not been able to find any clips from that.
The Hobbs and
what was
Shaw
it called?
Of the of the Cannonball franchise.
They're attempting to do the characters from Gumball, but they're in it for like 2 scenes. So it's like, it is essentially what we would call now an extended cameo for Terry Bradshaw, because, you know, big sports guy at the time. That's the thing that this movie does the worst of the 3, is actually making you feel like these people are racing one another. And this is like, I don't really think there's much interaction or camaraderie or really interaction between any of them.
No, because they were all going to do that off screen. You know that these are all buddies and they were just having a great time filming wherever the hell they were filming. And they figured, well, these are such personalities, we don't really have to write anything more. That's Terry Bradshaw driving that car. And that's Dom DeLuise next to Burt Reynolds, you know, like.
Oh, and look, there's George Firth.
Yeah, and the crazy thing, like I said at the top here, is that, you know, it was written by the guy who created the race and probably has a bunch of amazing stories. Like, the fact that Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise drive an ambulance is because the director and the writer did that, like, 2 years prior. And almost got, it broke down outside Palm Springs. Like, they could have won in that ambulance. So, like, knowing what I know and comparing it to the other two, like, this one should have been so much better, but obviously just ended up being a fuck around, like, party for the cast and crew.
Pretty much this is one of those, these guys probably had a lot of fun making this, probably more fun than we had watching it. I think it's really, I will be completely honest, it is definitely the nostalgia factor for me, because I think if I saw this right now, brand new, I'd be like, what the fuck is happening with this movie? This is not good. But having seen it so young, so many times, having these lines be part of your vocabulary, I can really see why I like this.
I understand your nostalgia for it, because if I had seen this 1,000,000 times on TV growing up, I would probably feel the same way. And there are parts of it that are fun, but man, like, Burt Reynolds is a lot better in Smokey and the Bandit. I mean, that for a Hal Needham movie that I've seen with him in it, like, I would rather just watch that again.
I mean, Needham, say what you will, but he did direct some solid stuff. Like I said, Hooper, I really like. Death Car in the Freeway is indeed very good.
Smokey and the Bandit's great.
The parts of this movie that I remembered fondly, I continued to enjoy when I was watching it again. And then the parts that I don't think I realized how much I disliked until recently we were watching it. So I'll continue to remember those fond moments. And if I'm going to rewatch a car movie, it's going to be Gumball Rally.
So let's go ahead. We're going to take another break and play a trailer for next week's show.
Observe this man closely. His eyes have seen violence. His nose has breathed corruption. His mouth has whispered both love and betrayal. Paramount Pictures presents The Conformist, a film directed by Bernardo Bertolucci. A study in the seduction of the soul. The rape of the mind. The art of political assassination. The Conformist, acclaimed at the Berlin Film Festival. The Conformist, filmed in the palaces of power, in the streets and secret cells of revolution. The Conformist, hailed at the New York Film Festival. Starring Jean-Louis Trintignant, surpassing even his roles in Z, and A Man and a Woman. The Conformist, a film that lashes out at a world gone mad. And all at once, the camera becomes an instrument of passion. A weapon of destruction. A time bomb of truth for this day and age. The Conformist. You dare not forget him.
That's right, we're toning things down a little bit next week with a look at Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Chris and Father Malone. So, Chris, what is going on with you, sir?
Over at the Culturecast right now, my movie podcast, we are talking about Rutger Hauer films that aren't Blade Runner. Yes, there are other films. I know. Yeah, shocked face. So we're talking about Blind Fury, The Hitcher, which I guess is probably, if it's not Blade Runner, it's The Hitcher. So we're talking about stuff like that. And yeah, Father Malone's rubbing his hands together because he is on one of those episodes.
I'm on The Hitcher, baby.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. You got your French fries ready?
Oh, yes, I do.
Love it.
So culturecast.com, cstachiw.com, cstachiw.com. That's my link tree for the stuff I work on.
And Father Malone, how about yourself, sir?
If you want to see any of my stuff or hear any of it, go over to fathermalone.com. You're going to find my podcast, a video podcast I do called Wolf and Raisin, the Banachek podcast I do with my partner, HP. There's also links to Dark Destinations and a whole bunch of shows where we talk about old television shows. FatherMalone.com.
Thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear if you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, you can check out some other podcasts that I work on with these guys. These guys that are on this show, you can hear me talk about Columbo, on The Shabby Detective. We've got Dreams for Sale, which is wrapping up pretty soon. There's another podcast. I think it's about the Night Gallery. Is that right? That's coming out there.
Midnight Viewing, sir. Midnight Viewing.
Yeah, it's out there. You can hear Chris and I talk about The Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller. We also talk about Rankin on Bass. They are available where all finer podcasts can be found. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.
Gumball.